Get her out. Now the blonde's voice cracked across the cathedral like a whip, and every head turned toward the plus-size woman standing quietly beside the third pew, holding a small white envelope against her chest. This is family only. She is not family. Nobody moved. The organist froze mid-note. 200 mourners in tailored black watched the woman named Serena Vitale point a manicured finger at a curvy stranger in a modest black lace dress, and for 3 long seconds the only sound in the entire cathedral was the soft hiss of candles burning. The curvy woman did not flinch. She did not defend herself. She simply lowered her eyes to the envelope in her hands, adjusted her grip on it, and turned to leave. That was the moment Dante Moreau stood up from the front pew. He did not shout. He did not gesture. He simply rose to his full height in his charcoal blazer, the sleeve tattoos on his forearm, briefly catching the candlelight. And he said one sentence in a voice quiet enough that every guest leaned forward to catch it. She stays. You leave. Silence swallowed the cathedral. Serena laughed, sharp and thin, the way a wine glass laughs before it breaks. She started to speak. Dante was already walking toward the aisle. His consigliere, an older man with silver hair named Matteo, closed his eyes briefly, the way a man closes his eyes when he already knows how a fire is going to spread. The curvy woman, her name was Vera Alonso, looked up, startled, and met Dante's gaze across the marble floor. She did not know she was about to become the most photographed woman in the country by morning. She did not know that the envelope in her hand contained a letter that would rearrange 3 generations of the Moreau family. She only knew that a coffin lay between her and the exit, that a stranger in a charcoal blazer had just chosen her over his own cousin's widow at a funeral, and that whatever came next was going to be very difficult to survive politely. To understand how a woman like Vera ended up standing in that cathedral at all, one has to go back 6 weeks to a small hospice on the outskirts of the city where an old man named Enzo Moreau spent his final afternoons refusing every visitor except the plus-size night nurse who read poetry to him after her shifts ended. He had not told anyone about her. He had not written her into any will they knew of. He had, however, written her one letter, sealed it himself with trembling hands, and instructed her to deliver it to his nephew Dante on the day of his funeral, in person without explanation. Vera had promised. She kept promises. That was the entire mechanism of the disaster now unfolding. The cathedral held its breath. Serena's chin lifted, Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Matteo turned his face toward the wall, the way an experienced man turns away from an oncoming truck. And Vera Alonso, exhausted from a double shift, took one careful step backward toward the door, still trying, somehow, to keep her promise without becoming a headline. 6 weeks earlier, Vera had walked into room 214 at St. Colette Hospice expecting the usual vitals, medication, the polite unfriendliness of a man who had been dying long enough to resent visitors. Enzo Moreau had watched her from the pillow, with faded gray eyes, and asked, without introduction, whether she believed a person could be forgiven for something they had never confessed. Depends on who you're asking to forgive you, she said, checking his IV line. Yourself, God, or the person you wronged. Yes, Enzo said. That was the whole answer. She adjusted his blanket, wrote down his blood pressure, and returned that night after her shift with a paperback of Neruda in her bag. She read 3 poems aloud before he fell asleep. She came back the next night, and the next. She never asked what he had done. He never asked why she came back. The arrangement was simpler than either of their families would have believed. During the day, Enzo received his nephew Dante, a tall, expensively dressed man Vera had glimpsed once in the corridor, all charcoal wool and silver watch and the quiet gravity of someone people stepped aside for. The staff whispered about the Moreau name in the break room. Vera did not participate. She had worked in enough private hospices to know that the last thing a dying man needed was a nurse who was impressed by his relatives. She treated Enzo the same way she treated the retired schoolteacher, in 217 and the widowed carpenter in 220, thoroughly, gently, and without any additional theater, which was, unbeknownst to her, exactly why Enzo began asking about her. "The one with the kind hands," he said to Dante one afternoon. "The night one." Dante had looked up from his phone. "A nurse. She reads to me." "Which one?" "The pretty one. Curvy. Brown hair." Dante frowned, not because he disapproved, but because Enzo had described a stranger with more affection than he had ever heard his uncle describe anyone. "Do you need me to arrange something?" "No," Enzo said. "You'll ruin it." That answer stayed with him, not because it was profound, because to Enzo it wasn't. On the last night, Enzo asked Vera for pen and paper. His hands shook so badly she offered to write for him. He refused. He wrote for nearly 2 hours, folded the pages into an envelope, sealed it, and pressed it into her palm with the last strength his fingers possessed. "My nephew Dante. At the funeral in person. Enzo, I can't just. Please." She looked at him. He was already halfway gone. She said yes, because there was no version of the world in which she said no to a dying man. He smiled once, closed his eyes, and by the time her shift ended, at 6 a.m., he was gone. She kept the envelope in her handbag for 6 days, wrapped in a clean handkerchief. She looked up the funeral information twice, put on her one black lace dress, took the bus across the city, and walked into a cathedral full of people who owned airplanes. She had not expected Serena Vitali. She had not expected 200 watchers. She certainly had not expected the man in the charcoal blazer to rise from the front pew and say in front of everyone that she was staying. She stays. You leave. The words did not travel. They landed. Dante Moreau had spent most of his adult life surrounded by people who adjusted themselves according to power. He was aware, without vanity, of the way rooms rearranged when he entered them. He was aware, too, that Serena Vitali had spent the last 4 years positioning herself as the closest thing his family had to a matriarch since his mother's death, and that expelling her from Enzo's funeral, in front of every business associate on the East Coast, was the kind of decision that would generate consequences for months. He did not care. He had watched from the front pew, a plus-size stranger accept public humiliation, with the calm of someone who had been humiliated before by better opponents. He had watched her lower her eyes, not in shame, but in refusal. Refusal to escalate, refusal to perform, refusal to make an old man's funeral about her. And he had watched her turn toward the door with an envelope pressed to her heart. The way a person carries something that belongs to somebody else. That was when he stood. Serena's face went white, then red, then a color for which there is no word. "Dante, darling, this woman is a stranger. She has no business." She was Enzo's nurse. A murmur moved through the pews. Serena's mouth opened and closed. That doesn't give her the right. He asked her to be here. He was dying, Dante. He was medicated, Serena. His voice did not rise. It did the opposite. It lowered to the volume he used for things that were about to become permanent. "Go home." She stared at him. He stared back. For a moment, the entire cathedral watched a silent argument that Serena had already lost the instant it began, because she was arguing, and he wasn't. She gathered her coat with theatrical dignity, made a small, tight sound in her throat, and walked down the aisle past the coffin with the posture of a woman leaving on her own terms. Nobody was fooled. The heavy doors closed behind her, with the sound like a lid settling. Dante turned back to Vera. She had not moved. She was standing with the envelope still against her chest, her cheeks flushed with the heat she was trying to breathe through, and she was looking at him the way a person looks at weather. Neither afraid nor grateful, simply waiting to see what it would do next. "You had something for me," he said. She nodded once. She stepped forward, around the pew, past the coffin. She stopped an arm's length from him. She lifted the envelope. Your uncle asked me to give this to you. In person. Today. He looked at the envelope. He looked at her. She was shorter than she had seemed from a distance, softer, more tired around the eyes. Her hands were steady. Thank you, he said. She nodded again and turned to go. Miss Alonzo Vera. Vera. He paused. Stay for the service. I'm not family. You're the reason he wasn't alone. That answer stopped her. She looked back at him, and something small and undefended passed across her face, and she nodded once more and sat down at the very end of the last pew, where nobody would have to move to make room. He did not open the letter until 3 in the morning. The mansion had emptied. The caterers had gone. The last of the mourners had shaken his hand, said the correct words, and been driven home. Matteo, who had been his father's consigliere before he was his, stood near the window nursing a whiskey and pretending not to watch him. The envelope sat on the desk between a cut crystal decanter and a photograph of Enzo at 40, laughing on a boat with people who were now mostly dead. Dante slid a thumb under the flap. Enzo's handwriting was terrible. An old man's scrawl fighting a shaking hand. But it was legible enough. Dante, it began without preamble. If you are reading this, then the woman I asked to bring it has done what most people in our family would not have. Please note that. There are things I never told you because I was a coward, and things I never told your father because he would have shot me. I want you to know both before you make any decision about the woman standing in front of you. Dante's jaw tightened. He read on. The letter was long. It described a decision Enzo had made 31 years earlier, a decision involving a young woman named Marisol Alonzo, a payment made quietly, a promise kept badly, and a child whose name Enzo had never learned. It described the shame of a man who had convinced himself, for 3 decades, that money was a form of care. It described the moment in the hospice when a night nurse walked into his room and Enzo had looked at her name badge, Alonzo, and known, with the sick certainty of a man being audited by God, that the universe had brought his sin to his bedside in the form of a stranger who was too kind to know she was owed anything. I never told her. I could not. She read to me. She held my hand. She never asked for anything. Dante, she does not know. She does not know who I was, or what I did, or that her grandmother once wept in a hallway I refused to walk down. If you tell her, and I hope you will, do it gently. She has spent her life being someone people underestimate. Do not add yourself to that list. Take care of her, or leave her alone. Do not stand in between. Dante set the letter down. He did not move for a long time. Matteo, who had learned in 40 years of service when not to speak, did not speak. Finally, without looking up, Dante said, "Find out everything about her, legally, quietly. I want to know what she does, where she lives, how she pays her rent, what her family looks like, and whether she has any idea of what, sir? That she is Enzo's granddaughter's cousin, or possibly his granddaughter." His handwriting is unclear. Matteo closed his eyes briefly. We're all doomed. Yes, sir. Whatever this is, do not confuse gratitude with owing. I know the difference. Do you? I will. Matteo set down his whiskey. Then start by not appearing at her workplace tomorrow. I wasn't going to appear at her workplace tomorrow. You were absolutely going to appear at her workplace tomorrow. Dante did not answer. He folded the letter, put it in his interior pocket, and went to bed at 4 a.m. with the specific insomnia of a man who has just inherited a debt he did not incur and cannot escape. He appeared at her workplace the next day. In his defense, which he was preparing internally for Matteo, it was technically legitimate business. The hospice had cared for Enzo, and the family would be making a donation. There was no reason the head of the family could not deliver the paperwork personally. There were, in fact, 17 reasons, all of which he ignored. He arrived at 7:14 a.m., which was 6 minutes before Vera's night shift ended. He knew this because he had asked Matteo. Matteo had provided the schedule with the closed expression of a man witnessing a slow-motion car accident. Vera was at the nurse's station updating a chart when Dante walked through the double doors, carrying a folder and a paper coffee cup. Two of her colleagues saw him first. One dropped a pen. The other quietly panicked into a filing cabinet. Vera looked up, blinked twice, and set down her pen the way a person sets down a pen, before dealing with a raccoon that has wandered into the kitchen. "Mr. Moreau, Miss Alonso, you're in a hospice. I noticed it's 7 in the morning. There's paperwork." She looked at the folder in his hand. It contained visibly 2 sheets of paper. "That's a lot of paperwork," she said. "It's complex." She stared at him for 4 seconds. He maintained composure. She said, "The coffee." "Yes? Is that for me?" It seemed rude not to. "You don't know how I take my coffee. Cream. No sugar." She narrowed her eyes. He held the cup out. She accepted it, because refusing would have been more theatrical than accepting, and she was very tired. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." A pause. "Was there something specific about the paperwork? Or the family is making a donation? In Enzo's name, I wanted to hand it over personally. To the night nurse. To you. The administrator's office opens at 9. Ah." He did not move. She took a sip of the coffee. It was, of course, exactly how she took her coffee. "Mr. Moreau. Dante. Mr. Moreau. Is there something else?" He looked at her, and for a moment his composure cracked, in a way that neither of them acknowledged. Then it sealed. "Have breakfast with me," he said. Behind him, the nurse who had panicked into the filing cabinet made a small, strangled sound. "I've been awake for 13 hours, Vera said. "Then dinner, tonight. I work tonight, tomorrow. I work tomorrow." "When do you not work?" "Thursday." "Then Thursday." She looked at him for a long moment. He was not a man used to being looked at that way, evaluated, calmly, without the assistance of his reputation. "Mr. Moreau? Why?" He held her gaze. "Because your uncle, my uncle, asked me to make sure you were all right." She frowned. "I'm all right." That's what he was afraid of. She did not understand that sentence. She would. Eventually. For now she took another sip of coffee, considered the extraordinary fact that the most feared man in the city was standing in her nurse's station at 7 a.m., holding a coffee he had guessed correctly, and said, "Thursday. 7. Somewhere with vegetables." He almost smiled. He did not. He nodded once, turned, and left. The nurse in the filing cabinet emerged slowly. "Vera, don't." "Vera." I said don't. Thursday came with the specific slowness of a day someone is dreading and looking forward to at the same time. Vera wore the burgundy wrap dress her sister had bought her 3 birthdays ago and had been waiting for an occasion. She told herself the occasion was gratitude, not romance. She told herself this all the way across the city, on the bus. She was still telling herself when Dante's driver, because of course there was a driver, held open the door of a restaurant she had walked past twice in her life without ever considering entering. Dante was already at the table. He stood when she arrived. He pulled out her chair. He did these things without ceremony, the way he did everything, as though they were simply the correct sequence of events. She sat, unfolded the napkin, and said, "You're going to have to tell me why I'm actually here. You said vegetables." "Dante?" He looked at her. It was the first time she had used his first name. He set down his water glass because otherwise he would have visibly reacted to it. "Your uncle wrote me a letter," he said. "In it he told me things about your family and mine that neither of us knew. I have not verified all of it. Some of it I do not want to verify. But there is a version of the truth in which you and I are distantly connected by a decision my uncle made 31 years ago that hurt your grandmother. Vera's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Tea. She lowered it. Explain, he explained. He kept it brief. He did not soften, and he did not embellish. He told her about Marisol Alonso, about the payment, about the silence, about the child. He told her he did not yet know if the child was her mother or her aunt. He told her he had a private lawyer working on it discreetly. He told her that Enzo had recognized her name badge in the hospice and had spent his last weeks being cared for by someone he owed a debt to, who did not know she was owed anything. Vera listened. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She held the stem of her wineglass and turned it very slowly between her fingers. And when he finished, she said, "So you brought me here to tell me I'm the mistake your family paid to disappear." No. That's what you just described. I brought you here because he asked me to make sure you were all right, and I've realized in the last 4 days that I don't know how to do that without your permission. She looked at him. That's a better answer. Thank you. You practiced it. I did. A small, unwilling smile touched the corner of her mouth. She hid it behind the wineglass. I don't want money. I didn't offer any. You were about to. I was considering it. Don't. All right. I don't want anything from your family, Dante. I want to know what he wrote. I want to know if my grandmother, her voice caught once, and she steadied it. If my grandmother spent her whole life ashamed of something that was done to her, not by her. If that's what this is, then I want to know. But I don't want a check. I don't want a house. I don't want to be introduced to anyone as a Moreau. Do you understand? Yes. Say it back to me. You want the truth, not the money. Good. She released the wineglass. She picked up her fork. Now feed me. I've been awake for 11 hours, and I did not put on this dress to negotiate. Truth arrived, as truths of that kind arrive, in pieces, across 2 weeks, in the small overheated apartment of Vera's grandmother's youngest sister, a woman named Rosa Alonso, who was 73 years old, sharp as a nail, and had waited 50 years for someone to ask her the correct question. She had not expected the question to arrive attached to a man in a charcoal blazer, but she had not lived through what she had lived through to be intimidated by tailoring. Rosa poured tea. She set down a photograph album that had not been opened in decades. She looked at Dante across her small kitchen table, took his measure, decided he would do, and said, "Ask." Dante asked. Rosa answered. Vera sat beside him with her hand pressed against her mouth for most of an hour. Marisol had been 17. Enzo had been 29, the youngest brother of a very dangerous man, and had done what men of his family did in that decade. When a young woman said no, he had arranged for the no to be inconvenient. He had not been violent. That was, Rosa said, with the flat contempt of a woman for whom this was a low bar, the one thing they could say. But he had been persuasive with money, and Marisol had been alone, and her family had needed the payment more than her dignity, and by the time she understood what she had agreed to, she was pregnant with Vera's mother, and Enzo Moreau had already left the country. He had sent money for 8 years. Then he had stopped. Marisol had raised the child alone, worked 2 jobs, told her daughter nothing, and died at 51 of a heart that had been asked to do too much for too long. Vera's mother had grown up believing her father was a merchant sailor who had drowned. She had died believing that. Vera had grown up believing that. Rosa closed the album. She looked at Vera. Your grandmother would have wanted you to know. She just did not want you to know while she was alive to be pitied for it. Vera did not cry. She had done her crying quietly 2 nights earlier in the shower, where Dante had not been able to see it. She held Rosa's hand across the table. She said, "Thank you for waiting to tell me." Rosa nodded once. She turned her sharp eyes on Dante. "And you?" "Yes, ma'am." You're one of them. Yes. What are you going to do about it? Whatever she asked me to do. That's a coward's answer. It's the only one that isn't dangerous. Rosa considered him for a long moment. Then to Vera's astonishment she smiled. A small, hard, unwilling smile. You'll do, Rosa said. For now. Dante inclined his head. Vera looked between them and understood, dimly, that something had just been decided in the room that she had not been consulted on. She would think about that later. For now she took the photograph album home in her lap, in the back of a car that did not belong to her, and Dante did not touch her hand, but he sat close enough that she could have reached for it, and that was, in its own way, the entire point. Serena Vitali had not accepted her funeral eviction. She had, in the interim, worked. She had made calls. She had had lunches. She had constructed, with the careful patience of a woman who had been polishing weapons for 20 years, a small, elegant social ambush, and she had chosen for it the Moreau family's annual charity gala, the one event of the year at which Dante could not walk out without making it front-page news. She was seated at table 3 when Vera entered on Dante's arm in an emerald gown that Rosa had helped her choose. She waited until the room had settled and champagne had been poured. She rose, glass in hand, and delivered a toast. To Enzo, of course, she began sweetly. And to the surprising new additions to our family. It is refreshing, isn't it, to see the old traditions bend. Some of us grew up understanding that a name carries responsibilities, but I'm sure Miss Alonso will learn. Have you ever managed a budget of this scale, dear? I only hope nobody has misunderstood Dante's kindness as something more personal. He does have a habit of collecting causes. The room went very still. Dante's jaw tightened. He began to rise. Vera set her hand on his forearm. She did not press. She simply rested it there, and he sat back down. Because he had promised her, 3 days earlier in her small kitchen, over cold tea, that if this moment came, he would let her handle it. He was regretting the promise. He kept it anyway. Vera stood. She did not raise her glass. She set it down. She looked at Serena across 3 tables, and she smiled. Not sweetly, not sharply, simply the way a very tired woman smiles at a problem she has decided to solve efficiently. Serena, she said. Her voice carried without effort, because the room was already silent for her. You've asked several questions, so I'll answer them. Yes, I've managed a budget, the night ward budget at St. Colette, which is smaller than this gala, but keeps more people alive. No, I have not misunderstood anything about Dante's kindness. He's been very clear. And no, I am not a cause. I am a nurse who read poetry to a dying man because nobody else was doing it, and who has, through no design of my own, learned some things about your family that I did not ask to know, and will not be discussing at dinner. She paused. I understand that my presence here is inconvenient for you. I want you to know that it is also inconvenient for me. I did not grow up expecting to wear this dress in this room, but I am here because a man I cared for asked me to be, and because the man beside me asked me to stay, and I have decided that your discomfort is not a good enough reason to disappoint either of them. Silence. Then, at table 7, an elderly woman in black, Enzo's oldest cousin, a matriarch nobody argued with, set down her fork. She stood. She lifted her glass. To Vera, she said, who has better manners than most of us. She drank. At table 5, a man stood, then another, then a woman at table 2, then Matteo, who had been leaning against a pillar, with his hands folded, straightened and raised his glass. One by one across a ballroom of 240 people they stood. Serena remained seated. She had, quite suddenly, become the loneliest woman in the room. She almost left. Not from the room. She stayed for the dinner because leaving would have made Serena a victim. She almost left the whole thing. Him. The apartment they had begun to talk about. The absurd, inconvenient orbit she had drifted into. She had not, until the toast fully understood how many people would decide her worth for her. If she remained inside his world, she had understood it, briefly from Serena's face, and she had not liked what she saw. She told him so, on the balcony. An hour later, when the crowd had thinned enough for them to slip out through the French doors, the city glittered below them. She held her elbows the way people hold themselves when the wind is not the problem. I can't be a project, Dante. I know. I can't be a scandal. You keep winning. I know that too. And I can't spend my life waiting for the next Serena. Because there is always another Serena. That's the whole model of the world you live in. He was quiet. He did not defend it. He did not explain. He looked at her, and she watched him choose his words, the way a man chooses a knife to give to a child. I have thought about this for 6 weeks, he said finally. I have thought about it more than I have thought about anything since my father died. I want to tell you that I love you, and I know that if I say it that way, you will not believe me, because everyone who has ever wanted anything from you has said something like it first, so I will tell you something else instead. She waited. When Enzo said your name, he said, the pretty one, curvy brown hair. And I remember thinking, my uncle has been dying for 6 months, and he has never described anyone with affection. Not once. And a stranger has done that to him in 3 weeks. I was jealous. Of a dying man. Of a nurse I hadn't met. I did not understand why, until I saw you refuse to fight Serena at the funeral. And then I understood, and I have understood every day since, that I have spent my entire life mistaking control for care, and that the only person I have ever met who does not confuse those two things is you. He paused. I am not asking you to marry me. I am not asking you to move in. I am asking you not to leave because Serena is loud. If you leave, leave because you don't want this. Not because someone else doesn't. Vera looked at him for a long time. She said, that was a lot of words for a man who claims he doesn't practice. I practiced. I know you did. She was crying a little, not enough to fall. She wiped it with the back of her wrist. Dante. Yes. I'm not going to leave tonight. Okay. I'm going to think about it for a week. Okay. And I'm going to keep working. Okay. And you are not going to buy the hospice. I already looked into it, Dante. I won't. Say it. I won't buy the hospice. Or my apartment building. I won't buy your apartment building. A pause. Or the bus company. The bus is dangerous. Dante, I won't buy the bus company. She smiled. Unwilling, exhausted. He almost smiled back. He did not. He was still trying to decide whether he was allowed. She reached up and set her palm briefly against his cheek, over the stubble, over the jaw, that had frightened 200 people 3 weeks earlier. He closed his eyes. That was as close as he had ever come to being held. It was, she suspected, more than enough. She thought about it for a week. She kept her word. He kept his. On Thursday she called him. She said, come at 7. Somewhere with vegetables. He said, yes. That was the entire negotiation. In the 6 months that followed, several things happened, all of them small, none of them romantic in the way that magazines describe romance. Dante did not buy the hospice, though he did, under a foundation he did not name after himself, fund a night shift wellness program that provided, among other things, better coffee. Vera did not move into the mansion. She moved into a small, quiet apartment, 3 blocks from the hospice, in a building he had not bought, though he had at one point made a call about it. That she had made him unmake, she kept working nights. He learned to pick her up at 6 a.m. on the 2 mornings a week she allowed him to, and he learned to bring coffee correctly, and he learned, slowly, painfully, to allow her to be tired without immediately arranging for her not to be. Matteo watched all of this with the exhausted amusement of a man who had prepared for war and been asked to attend a book club instead. Rosa met Dante for tea every Sunday. She was hard on him. He accepted it. she began. After 3 months to soften, a millimeter at a time, Serena Vitale left the country under the polite social fiction of a health retreat and did not come back. Nobody asked after her. Dante's cousins, one by one, came to Vera, not because Dante had instructed them to, but because they had noticed, without being told, that she remembered everyone's name and asked after their mothers. Old men in the family began to send her small, unnecessary gifts, a jar of olives, a bottle of oil, a book of poems, the way old men do when they have decided a woman is family. She thanked each of them by hand. She did not become a Moreau. She did not become anything other than what she had always been. A plus-sized night nurse who read poetry to dying people and treated janitors and heads of families with identical patience, and yet the world around her, slowly, in ways she never asked for, rearranged itself to see her. That was the strange grace of competence, Dante thought, watching her from doorways. The world had been trained not to see her. All she had done was refuse to help it look away. He did not tell her he loved her again. He didn't need to. He demonstrated it in the small, stupid ways she had asked for. By not buying things, by not intervening, by learning to sit inside his own helplessness without breaking anything. A year to the day after Enzo Moreau's funeral, Vera walked back into the cathedral. She had not planned to. She had been passing on the bus and had noticed the doors were open for evening mass, and something in her had asked her to get off at the next stop and walk back. She lit a candle for Enzo. She lit one for her grandmother. She lit a third for her mother, who had died believing a story that was not true, and whom Vera hoped, in whatever place people went, had by now been told the real one. She sat down in the last pew where nobody had had to move to make room. Dante found her there 20 minutes later, because of course he did. She had not called him. He had, at some point over the last year, developed the extraordinary ability to know where she was when she was somewhere sad. He did not sit at the front. He walked all the way to the back and sat down beside her, at the very end of the last pew. He did not speak. She did not speak. They watched the candles for a long time. Then, without looking at him, Vera said, "Serena wrote to me." He turned his head. When last week, from wherever she went, it was a very careful letter. "What did it say?" She apologized. She said she had spent a year understanding what she had done and that she did not expect a reply. She said she was writing because Enzo had asked her to a long time ago, and she had refused, and she was trying to correct her regrets in the order she had accumulated them. A pause. It was a good letter, actually. It was the best sentence she ever wrote in her life. "Did you reply?" "I did." "What did you say?" "I said thank you, and that I hope she was well, and that I did not need her to be well for me, but that I hoped she was for herself." Dante was quiet. Then he said, "That is more grace than I would have given her. I know. Why did you—" She turned to look at him. In the candlelight she looked, to him, exactly like what she was. A tired, curvy woman in a burgundy dress who had chosen mercy because it was cheaper than resentment and better for her sleep and Mon. "Because," she said, "somebody once stood up in this cathedral and said I could stay, and I have been trying, since that day, to be the kind of person who says that to other people. Even Serena." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "Vera, yes, marry me." She blinked. She laughed once, softly, the way a person laughs when they have been waiting for a sentence for so long they had forgotten it was possible. "Dante, I practiced. I know you did. Was it any good?" "It was terrible." "Yes. Ask me again in the kitchen, over cold tea, where I can throw a spoon at you if I need to." "All right. But the answer will probably be yes." "I know." He took her hand. She let him. Behind them, at the altar, a single candle guttered and steadied. Outside, the city moved on without noticing that anything had changed. Inside, at the very end of the last pew, where nobody had had to move to make room, Two people sat quietly, holding hands, exactly where they had begun.